I still remember the exact way my sister's smile stretched when she handed me the dress. A little too wide. A little too slow. All 7 of her bridesmaids had just opened their ivory boxes to reveal floor-length chiffon gowns in the most elegant dusty lavender. The other girls gasped and squealed, holding them up to the morning light filtering through the hotel's suite windows. For a moment, the room felt like a soft watercolor painting, delicate, expensive, perfectly coordinated. Then my sister turned to me. She pressed a black garment bag into my hands, her glossy lips curling into something that was supposed to look like an apology, but landed closer to a smirk. "Yours is a little different, Leora," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The store completely ran out of lavender in your size. Can you believe it? But don't worry, I picked something special just for you." I unzipped the bag. Inside was a tangerine disaster. Bright, aggressive, unapologetically orange. The kind of synthetic, traffic cone orange that screams for attention and simultaneously repels it. It was also, very clearly, 2 sizes too big. The fabric bunched in heavy folds around the waist, and the shoulder seams would have hung halfway down my arms. I looked up, waiting for anyone, to say something. The other bridesmaids suddenly became very interested in their own dresses. My mother, Marta, perched on the arm of a velvet chair, glanced over. She saw the orange. She saw my face. And without missing a beat, she said, "Just make it work, Leora. This is your sister's day. Stop trying to make everything about you." I swallowed. I had been swallowing words like that for 28 years. I was 29 years old. I had a master's degree, a condo I'd bought entirely on my own, and a life I'd carefully constructed 300 miles away from my family. But the moment I stepped back into their orbit, I was 12 again, being scolded for breathing too loud at Celeste's birthday party, for having the wrong expression in family photos, for existing in a way that seemed to inconvenience them. Celeste was 2 years younger, but my parents had always treated her like the only sun in our family's solar system. I was, at best, a distant moon. At worst, an afterthought. I had learned early that my role was to accommodate, to shrink, to never outshine. So I nodded. I took the orange dress, offered a tight smile, and told myself I could survive one weekend. It was just fabric, I thought. Just one day. I had survived worse. What I didn't know then, as I stood in that hotel suite holding that ugly dress, was that by the end of the reception, everything my family believed about me, about themselves, about our entire history, would begin to crack open. The months leading up to the wedding had already been a slow-motion study in exclusion. I was the last to be asked to be a bridesmaid, and even then, it felt like an obligation, a seat filler to even out the numbers. I wasn't added to the group chat until 2 weeks after everyone else. The dress-fitting invitation arrived only because I called to ask. When I flew in for what I thought was a bridal shower, I discovered the event had happened the weekend before. "Oh, we figured you'd be too busy with work," my mother said, her voice flat, as if she were remarking on the weather. That familiar ache settled back into my chest, a dull, chronic pain I'd learned to live with. Being the family's emotional buffer meant absorbing slights without complaint. It meant understanding, deep in my bones, that my feelings were never the priority. Still, I showed up. I paid for my own flight, my own hotel room, my own alterations to a dress I would never wear again. The night before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, my father raised a glass. Harlan Vance, the man who had raised me, beamed at the crowd. "To Celeste," he said, his voice thick with pride. "My only daughter, the most beautiful bride." He looked directly at me as he said it, and I saw the flicker of something intentional in his eyes. My mother squeezed his arm affectionately. No one corrected him. I stood near the back, my champagne untouched, my smile frozen. That night, alone in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. I scrolled to a contact I had never once used, a number saved under a name I had never spoken aloud. It represented a truth I had buried for nearly a decade, a piece of information I had locked away out of some misplaced sense of family loyalty. My real father, a man I discovered through a sealed letter when I was 19, was not the man who had raised me. And the identity of that man carried a weight I had never been willing to test. The letter had been hidden in my mother's jewelry box, beneath a velvet lining. I found it by accident, looking for a pair of earrings I wanted to borrow. Inside was a handwritten note from a man named Julian Hawthorne, addressed to my mother. It spoke of a daughter he had never been allowed to meet. It enclosed a check for $200,000, dated 6 months after my birth. For her future, it said, "Tell no one. I will provide quietly." I had read that letter 100 times in the decade since. And I had watched, with quiet devastation, as my parents renovated their kitchen, bought a new car, and eventually funded Celeste's first wedding deposits, all from accounts I had traced back to a trust in my name that I had never been allowed to access. A trust that Julian Hawthorne had been quietly replenishing for years. They had used his guilt to build their lives, while treating me like a stain they couldn't quite wash out. That night, I typed a single message. Then I deleted it. Then I typed it again. My thumb hovered over send for a long time before I finally pressed it. The message was simple: "I'm ready to talk. Tomorrow, after the wedding." I slept fitfully. The morning of the ceremony, I put on the orange dress. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The oversized gown swallowed my frame. The color was so aggressively wrong against the soft lavender of the other bridesmaids that I looked like a warning sign, something placed there intentionally to signal a mistake. My mother saw me and said nothing. My father avoided my gaze. Celeste glided past me in her white gown, and as she passed, she murmured, "You look brave. Thank you for not making a scene." Her tone dripped with condescension dressed up as gratitude. I could feel the camera phones of a dozen guests lifting as they captured the contrast, the elegant bridal party in lavender, and me, the off-brand outlier, the joke. During the ceremony, I stood at the far end of the altar, half hidden behind a floral arrangement. I kept my face calm, my posture straight. Inside, though, a shift was happening. A quiet internal click. For years, I had tolerated the disrespect because I believed that if I just stayed small enough, they might one day see my value. But as I stood there in that ridiculous orange tent, I realized the truth: they never would. And more importantly, I no longer needed them to. If I accepted this moment in silence, I wasn't just agreeing to wear an ugly dress. I was agreeing with the message behind it, that I was less than. That I deserved to be the punchline. And I was done agreeing. The reception was held at an upscale vineyard estate, all fairy lights and crisp white linens. I slipped in quietly, avoiding the wedding party entrance. I found a seat near the back, away from the head table, and watched as the room buzzed with celebration. No one came to check on me. No one asked me to dance. My parents slow danced with each other, beaming at Celeste and her new husband, Owen, as if they were royalty. And then it happened. An older woman I didn't recognize began making her way toward me through the crowd. She was elegant, probably in her late 70s, with silver hair pinned up and a silk scarf draped around her shoulders. She moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had once commanded rooms. The letter had been hidden in my mother's jewelry box, beneath a velvet lining. I found it by accident, looking for a pair of earrings I wanted to borrow. Inside was a handwritten note from a man named Julian Hawthorne, addressed to my mother. It spoke of a daughter he had never been allowed to meet. It enclosed a check for $200,000, dated 6 months after my birth. For her future, it said, "Tell no one. I will provide quietly." I had read that letter 100 times in the decade since. And I had watched, with quiet devastation, as my parents renovated their kitchen, bought a new car, and eventually funded Celeste's first wedding deposits, all from accounts I had traced back to a trust in my name that I had never been allowed to access. A trust that Julian Hawthorne had been quietly replenishing for years. They had used his guilt to build their lives, while treating me like a stain they couldn't quite wash out. That night, I typed a single message. Then I deleted it. Then I typed it again. My thumb hovered over send for a long time before I finally pressed it. The message was simple: "I'm ready to talk. Tomorrow, after the wedding." I slept fitfully. The morning of the ceremony, I put on the orange dress. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The oversized gown swallowed my frame. The color was so aggressively wrong against the soft lavender of the other bridesmaids that I looked like a warning sign, something placed there intentionally to signal a mistake. My mother saw me and said nothing. My father avoided my gaze. Celeste glided past me in her white gown, and as she passed, she murmured, "You look brave. Thank you for not making a scene." Her tone dripped with condescension dressed up as gratitude. I could feel the camera phones of a dozen guests lifting as they captured the contrast, the elegant bridal party in lavender, and me, the off-brand outlier, the joke. During the ceremony, I stood at the far end of the altar, half hidden behind a floral arrangement. I kept my face calm, my posture straight. Inside, though, a shift was happening. A quiet internal click. For years, I had tolerated the disrespect because I believed that if I just stayed small enough, they might one day see my value. But as I stood there in that ridiculous orange tent, I realized the truth. They never would. And more importantly, I no longer needed them to. If I accepted this moment in silence, I wasn't just agreeing to wear an ugly dress. I was agreeing with the message behind it, that I was less than. That I deserved to be the punchline. And I was done agreeing. The reception was held at an upscale vineyard estate, all fairy lights and crisp white linens. I slipped in quietly, avoiding the wedding party entrance. I found a seat near the back, away from the head table, and watched as the room buzzed with celebration. No one came to check on me. No one asked me to dance. My parents slow danced with each other, beaming at Celeste and her new husband, Owen, as if they were royalty. And then it happened. An older woman I didn't recognize began making her way toward me through the crowd. She was elegant, probably in her late 70s, with silver hair pinned up and a silk scarf draped around her shoulders. She moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had once commanded rooms. I later learned she was the groom's grandmother, Vivian Hawthorne, the matriarch of his family, a woman who had been observing quietly all evening. She stopped directly in front of me. Her eyes swept over the orange dress, then settled on my face with an expression I couldn't immediately read. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm, her skin cool and dry. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her lavender perfume, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for me. "Oh my God, she doesn't know who your real father is, does she? He tried to reach you." They always turned him away. The noise of the reception seemed to fall away. My heart slammed against my ribs. She held my gaze, unblinking, waiting. And in that split second, I understood. The secret I had guarded for a decade, the truth about who I really was not just my secret anymore. I looked past her shoulder. Across the ballroom, Celeste was laughing, her head thrown back, a glass of champagne in her hand. She had no idea. My parents, seated at the head table, had no idea. But I did. And now, so did the grandmother of the man who had just married into our family. I turned back to Vivian Hawthorne, my pulse steadying into something cold and clear. I didn't answer her question out loud. I didn't have to. My expression must have told her everything, because she simply nodded once, squeezed my hand again, and walked away without another word. I stood there, the orange dress still swallowing me whole, but suddenly I didn't feel small anymore. I felt the ground beneath me shift. I felt the weight of a truth that was about to land squarely in the middle of my sister's perfect life. And for the first time all weekend, I felt something that tasted almost like peace, because I knew, with absolute certainty, that the fallout was just beginning. I stood there as Vivian Hawthorne's silk scarf vanished into the crowd. The noise of the reception rushed back in, the clinking of glasses, the thrum of a string quartet, Celeste's unmistakable laughter cutting through it all like a blade. But everything felt different now. The air was thicker. My skin tingled with the electric certainty that the ground beneath this wedding was about to split wide open. I didn't chase the grandmother. I didn't need to. That single sentence had confirmed what I had suspected from the moment I walked into the venue, that my existence, my very blood, was tied to a family I was never supposed to claim. And now someone on the inside knew. Someone who owed no loyalty to my parents or my sister. I moved slowly through the tables, the orange dress still hanging off me like a borrowed costume, but I no longer felt ridiculous in it. I felt dangerous. I felt like a match hovering an inch above a pool of gasoline. 15 minutes passed. Maybe 20. I watched my mother clink glasses with the groom's aunt. I watched Harlan, the man who had raised me, the man who had called Celeste his only daughter, shake hands with the groom's father, Julian Hawthorne, a silver-haired man who had arrived late and kept mostly to the periphery. I had never met Julian before, but I knew who he was, and I knew that he had just received my message. I saw him glance at his phone. Then he looked up and scanned the room. His eyes passed over me, paused, then returned. I saw his face change. A slow, seismic shift. Vivian had reached his side now, her hand resting on his arm. She nodded toward me. And then Julian Hawthorne began walking toward me. Celeste was mid-sentence with a group of her college friends when she noticed. My sister had a radar for attention, and the sight of her new father-in-law crossing the ballroom toward her least favorite person triggered something in her. Her champagne flute froze in midair. Her smile stiffened. "Leora," she called out, her voice slicing through the ambient noise. "Why is Mr. Hawthorne coming to you?" She laughed, but it was a laugh with edges. "Did you trip over your dress and embarrass yourself again?" I didn't answer. Julian Hawthorne stopped 3 feet from me. Up close, I could see the bone structure we shared, the same jawline, the same heavy-lidded eyes. He was a handsome man in his late 50s, but his expression was carved from years of carefully managed secrets. His voice, when he spoke, was low enough that only I could hear it. "I got your message." He paused. "My mother just told me you're here. In that dress." He looked at the orange gown, and something dark flickered across his face. "They did this to you?" "They always do something like this to me," I said quietly. I just stopped letting it break me. Celeste had closed the distance now, my parents trailing behind her like confused bodyguards. My sister's face was flushed, her perfect bridal composure cracking. "What is going on? Why are you talking to my husband's father?" "Leora, what did you do?" Julian didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me. "Does she know?" I shook my head. "No. They never told her. They never told anyone." Celeste's voice rose. "Told me what?" "Mom, what is she talking about?" My mother's face had gone the color of old milk. She grabbed Harlan's arm, and I watched him look between me and Julian Hawthorne with dawning, gut-wrenching recognition. He had always known I wasn't his. He had just agreed to pretend. For the money. For the house. For Celeste's fairy tale wedding. I turned to face my family fully. The string quartet had stopped playing. A hush was rippling outward from our little cluster like a stone dropped in still water. The groom, Owen Hawthorne, appeared at his mother's side, confused and alarmed. "I'm his daughter," I said, gesturing toward Julian Hawthorne. His biological daughter, not Harlan's. The money for this wedding, the deposits, the venue, the flowers came from a trust fund Julian set up for me when I was a baby. They siphoned it. For years. For you. Celeste's laugh came out like a bark. "That's insane. You're insane. You're just jealous because..." "I have the bank records," I said, my voice flat and steady. "I have the letter your mother kept hidden in her jewelry box for 19 years. I have a decade of statements showing withdrawals from an account with my name on it that I never signed for. My mother had been listed as custodian until I turned 30. She had legal access. She just never had my consent. This wedding, your new car, the down payment on the house, all of it was bought with the price of my silence." Vivian Hawthorne stepped forward now, her voice carrying the quiet authority of a matriarch who had seen empires rise and fall. "Julian," she said, "is this true?" Julian nodded, his expression broken and resolute. "I paid them to keep Leora a secret. I was married. Owen's mother never knew. I thought I was protecting everyone." He looked at me, and his voice cracked. "I tried to see you when you were a child. Your mother threatened to expose everything to my wife. She said she'd tell the court I harassed you. I was a coward. I chose my reputation over my daughter. I didn't know they were abusing you." He gestured at the orange dress, the humiliation, the lifetime of being erased. "I didn't know." My mother lunged forward, her composure shattered. "You little ungrateful," she started, but Harlan caught her arm. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something other than cold indifference in his eyes. It was fear. Pure, unvarnished terror. Because he understood what was happening. Julian Hawthorne was not just Owen's father. He was the primary funder of the family's considerable fortune. And in that moment, with that admission, every financial pipeline that had kept my parents comfortable for decades was about to dry up. Owen stared at his father. His new wife was trembling beside him. The guests were openly staring now, phones forgotten, champagne flutes held in suspended animation. Somewhere, a wedding planner was frantically whispering into a headset, but no one was listening. Owen turned to Celeste, his voice breaking. "Your family has been stealing from my father for decades, and the secret they were hiding is my half-sister, standing right there in that dress." He gestured toward me, then back at Celeste. "We just married into a lie." I stepped back. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. The secret that had lived inside my ribs for a decade was finally outside of me, standing in the open air, undeniable. I turned to Julian Hawthorne. "I didn't do this to destroy your son's wedding," I said. "I did it because I was tired of being the only one carrying the weight of a lie they all benefited from. You want to make things right? Then stop paying them." He nodded. "The accounts are already frozen." My mother let out a sound I had never heard before, a keening, desperate noise that was half sob, half rage. Celeste was weeping now, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her perfect day crumbling around her. But no one rushed to comfort her. The Hawthorne family was huddled together, processing the revelation that their patriarch had a secret daughter and that their new in-laws were financial predators. I didn't wait for the aftermath. I gathered the excess fabric of the orange dress in one hand and walked out of the reception hall, my bare feet silent on the polished floor. The last thing I saw was Vivian Hawthorne, watching me with something that looked like respect. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unspooled like thread from a spool. Owen and Celeste's marriage was annulled within a month. My parents' home, bought with trust fund money, went into foreclosure after the payments stopped. My mother sent me a series of messages, alternating between fury and desperate pleas, but I blocked her number. Celeste tried to spin the story to anyone who would listen, but the truth had already spread through the Hawthorne social circle like wildfire. They were pariahs. I met Julian for coffee, then dinner. Then slowly, tentatively, we began to build something that looked like a relationship. It wasn't easy. He had a lifetime of absence to answer for. But he showed up. He apologized. And he never asked me to hide again. As for me, I went back to my condo, my job, my quiet life 300 miles away. I gave away the orange dress. I didn't need the reminder. I had spent 28 years being told I was a problem. It turned out I was simply a truth they couldn't afford to face. What would you have done if you discovered your whole family had built their lives on a secret that was supposed to belong to you?